Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, a name that sent shivers down the spine of the Imperial Japanese Navy every time it was mentioned. To them, he was the ghost of the ocean, always appearing at the right moment, one step ahead and turning the tide of battle. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor, Nimitz revived the Pacific Fleet. He turned despair into strength, step by step pushing the Japanese Empire out of the seas they once claimed as their domain. To Americans, he was the embodiment of reason, discipline, and strategy. But to the Japanese, Chester W. Nimitz remained a haunting presence, a calm, cold, and almost infallible adversary. And to truly understand his pivotal role in the Pacific theater, we must return to the moment when the world had just crossed the threshold into one of the greatest upheavals of the 20th century. By the end of 1941, the world was deeply engulfed in the Second World War. In Europe, Nazi Germany had occupied most of the continent. In Asia, the Empire of Japan, after annexing Korea and establishing Manchukuo in northeastern China, began moving south, invading mainland China, seizing Indochina, advancing toward the East Indies, the Philippines, and even Australia. Meanwhile, Japanese forces captured Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Malaysia, advanced into Burma, and threatened the northern coast of Australia. On the 7th of December 1941, the Japanese Empire launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, dragging America into the war with blood, steel, and fury. Within just a few hours, nearly half of the Pacific Fleet was sunk or severely damaged. More than 2,000 soldiers were killed. The commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet at that time, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, lost the nation's trust and was forced to resign. The entire United States was shaken. The pride of the U.S. Navy had been dealt an unprecedented blow, and Washington needed someone cold enough not to tremble, calm enough not to panic, someone who could rebuild the Pacific Fleet and gradually turn the tide. For that reason, President Franklin D. Roosevelt immediately appointed Chester W. Nimitz, an admiral known for his composure, to take command. Chester Nimitz was born in 1,885 inches. Texas, graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 1905 and rose through various commanding positions aboard warships. He was particularly knowledgeable about submarines and logistics, having pioneered at-sea refueling techniques and becoming one of the Navy's leading experts on diesel engines. In early 1941, President Roosevelt had offered Nimitz the position of commander of the Pacific Fleet, but he modestly declined, believing he lacked the seniority compared to other admirals. However, when war broke out, Nimitz could no longer refuse a direct order from the president. Nimitz arrived at Pearl Harbor around New Year's 1942. Witnessing the devastation, he calmly assessed the damage and concluded that the situation could have been much worse. Although the battleships had been sunk, they lay in shallow waters and could be salvaged and repaired. The crews from the damaged ships could be reassigned to the many new warships soon to be launched by the United States. Nimitz wrote to his wife, admitting that the road ahead would be an extremely difficult period, but affirming that he was not discouraged and that everyone must be patient and wait for the right moment. He also refused to place blame on his predecessor, believing that the disaster at Pearl Harbor could have happened to anyone, and chose to retain Admiral Kimmel's entire staff to work together in avenging the defeat. The ceremony to hand over command of the Pacific Fleet took place on the 31st of December 1941, under extraordinary circumstances. Nimitz decided to hold it right on the deck of the submarine USS Grayling. Anchored in the harbor, he wanted to honor the submarine force, the silent warriors who were the first to strike back at Japan after the Pearl Harbor disaster. In fact, Nimitz's own son was serving aboard a patrol submarine in the Pacific at that very time. The early months of 1942 were the darkest days for America and the greatest test of Chester W. Nimitz's life. After the blow at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Empire did not stop. It swept across Asia, capturing Hong Kong and Singapore, advancing into Indochina, threatening India and Australia, and making Americans fear that their own homeland might be the next target. In Nimitz's hands remained only a thin force, a few aircraft carriers, a handful of cruisers, and hundreds of sailors still struggling to recover amid the burned-out wrecks of ships in the harbor. He had no advantage, no time, no choice. There were moments when Nimitz thought, If I'm lucky, I can hold out for 6 months, just 6 months, before the impatience of the American public would turn into frustration. But instead of panicking, he quietly began to piece everything back together. Every ship was repaired, every crew was retrained, and in silence, he prepared for the first counterstrike. In April 1942, from a daring plan carefully crafted, a squadron of bombers took off from an aircraft carrier, something that had never been done before, and flew straight toward Tokyo. The Doolittle raid did not inflict much physical damage on Japan, but it achieved something far more important. It rekindled hope. It showed Americans that they could strike back and that the Japanese Empire could bleed. Then, in early May 1942, the Japanese Navy launched an operation to capture Port Moresby in southern New Guinea, a strategic springboard from which to directly threaten Australia. To stop this advance, Chester Nimitz ordered the U.S. carrier forces to move south into the Pacific. From May 4 to May 8, the two sides clashed in the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first major naval engagement in history in which opposing fleets of aircraft carriers attacked each other without ever coming into direct sight. The entire battle was fought through long-range airstrikes. Throughout 4 days of fierce fighting, the United States lost the carrier USS Lexington and suffered heavy damage to the USS Yorktown, taking greater material losses overall. However, the Japanese were forced to cancel their invasion of Port Moresby after their two main carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, were put out of action, one heavily bombed, the other having lost nearly all of its aircraft and pilots. Though not a clear victory in numbers, this was the first time Nimitz had managed to halt the Japanese advance, and, more importantly, the loss of those two carriers significantly weakened Japan's fleet just weeks before the Battle of Midway. Soon after, U.S. intelligence deciphered Japan's next move, a direct attack on Midway Island, the strategic gateway to Hawaii. This information came through the tireless code-breaking efforts of a team led by Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort. Although some subordinate officers remained skeptical, Nimitz placed full trust in the intelligence reports and decided to deploy all remaining American aircraft carriers to set a trap for the Japanese fleet. He even ordered the heavily damaged carrier USS Yorktown, crippled at the Coral Sea, to be repaired in a lightning-fast effort that took only 3 days before returning to battle. Morning of the 4th of June, 1942, the waters near Midway Island, the Imperial Japanese Navy entered the battle they believed would deliver the final blow to the United States. But they had no idea that Chester W. Nimitz was already waiting with 3 American aircraft carriers lying in ambush offshore. A squadron of American dive bombers, launched from the carrier Enterprise, suddenly broke through the clouds and dove straight into the heart of the Japanese formation. In less than 10 minutes, Japan's 3 main carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were engulfed in flames, and more than 200 Japanese aircraft were destroyed on their decks. Fire spread rapidly across the carriers, where hundreds of planes were being refueled and armed with bombs. No one had time to react. Japanese sailors trampled over one another trying to escape. Amid the deafening explosions, the Empire of Japan's most elite air fleet was annihilated right where it stood, before it could even take off. By the end of the day, the 4th carrier, Hiryu, was also sunk. In less than 24 hours, Japan had lost over 300 pilots, nearly all of its main carriers, and most importantly, the strategic initiative it had held since the beginning of the war. The Battle of Midway was not merely a triumph of firepower, it was a victory of resolve, of precise intelligence, analysis, and of faith. Nimitz had gambled everything he had left, and he won. After Midway, the U.S. Navy no longer fought on the defensive. They began to advance. As for the Japanese Empire, though, they continued to fight. They had entered a downward spiral with no way out. After the turning point victory at Midway, the Allied forces launched Operation Watchtower, a counteroffensive in the South Pacific. In August 1942, U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The battle for Guadalcanal lasted 6 brutal months, fought fiercely on land, at sea, and in the air. It was not until February 1943 that American forces finally drove the Japanese out of the island, securing the vital sea lanes to Australia and forcing Japan into a defensive posture. Though the losses on both sides were severe, Japan's defeat at Guadalcanal firmly established the Allies' strategic initiative in the Southern Pacific theater. In 1943, the Pacific War temporarily entered a lull. This was the pivotal period during which Nimitz and the Allied High Command built up their forces for the massive counteroffensives to come. During this year, American industry produced a torrent of new warships, especially aircraft carriers, landing ships, and countless modern aircraft, shifting the balance of power decisively in favor of the United States. Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur, commander of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, both adopted the island-hopping strategy, bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions and concentrating their strength on capturing key objectives that would serve as stepping stones toward Japan itself. This flexible approach allowed U.S. forces to leapfrog from one island to another, avoiding costly battles for every small outpost, saving both time and countless lives. By 1944, as the balance of power had shifted, Nimitz launched a series of major offensive operations across the Central Pacific. In November 1943, the U.S. Navy struck the Gilbert Islands, beginning with the bloody Battle of Tarawa. Following that, Nimitz captured the entire Marshall Islands early in 1944, establishing bases at Kwajalein and Eniwetok to serve as springboards for the next phase. In June 1944, American forces landed in the Mariana Islands with the goal of constructing strategic airfields from which to launch direct bombing raids on Japan. To counter this threat, the Imperial Japanese Navy committed nearly all of its remaining fleet for a decisive battle in the Marianas. In June 1944, across the vast expanse of the Philippine Sea, two massive fleets closed in on each other. On one side was Japan committing the last remnants of its naval air power to a decisive battle. On the other was the United States wielding superior numbers of carriers, advanced radar technology, and battle-hardened pilots. And behind the American formation stood the familiar commander, Chester W. Nimitz. On the morning of June 19, the skies west of the Mariana Islands erupted in fire. Japanese aircraft launched in waves from their carriers, heading straight toward the American fleet. But this time, they no longer held the advantage. The U.S. ships, equipped with advanced radar, detected the enemy from afar. As the Japanese planes entered range, waves of anti-aircraft fire roared into the sky. Above, American pilots better trained in flying the faster, tougher F-6F Hellcats cut down the enemy squadrons one after another. In a single day, more than 300 Japanese aircraft were shot down. The losses were so devastating that U.S. pilots grimly dubbed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a phrase both mocking and tragic for the other side. Japan had lost nearly all of its carrier pilots, the last of its elite, irreplaceable airmen. On the evening of June 20, as the Japanese fleet attempted to retreat, American aircraft from the carriers Enterprise and Lexington pursued them into the sunset. In the fading light, a torpedo slammed through the deck of the carrier Hio, turning it into a blazing fireball on the sea. The victory in the Philippine Sea was decisive. After 2 days of fierce combat, the Imperial Japanese Navy no longer possessed any effective air defense. The gateway to the Mariana Islands was wide open. Within weeks, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam all fell in succession. And from these islands, the mighty B-29 bombers began to take off their flight paths aimed toward Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, as one Japanese city after another shook under the weight of unprecedented bombing raids. At the same time, in the Southwest, General MacArthur fulfilled his promise. I shall return to the Philippines. To coordinate operations, Nimitz moved the forward headquarters of the Pacific Fleet to Guam, immediately after the island was secured, preparing to conduct the liberation of the Philippines alongside MacArthur. In October 1944, American forces landed on Leyte Island, launching the campaign to retake the Philippine archipelago. The Imperial Japanese Navy mounted a massive counteroffensive aimed at annihilating the U.S. landing force, leading to the Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23, 944. Regarded as the largest naval battle in modern history. With overwhelming superiority in firepower and air power, the U.S. fleet decisively crushed the Japanese Navy. After this battle, Japan's naval forces were effectively destroyed, surrendering complete control of the Pacific to the United States. The Philippine campaign also severed Japan's vital oil supply lines from Southeast Asia, crippling Tokyo's war machine as fuel shortages brought it to a halt. By the end of 1944, after a series of victories, Chester W. Nimitz was promoted to Fleet Admiral, the highest rank in the U.S. Navy. But he knew the greatest battle was still ahead. It lay on a small strip of land off the coast of Japan, called Iwo Jima. As he had foreseen, on the morning of the 19th of February 1945, the amphibious assault began. Iwo Jima was barely 20 kilometers long, yet it was a critical strategic point from there. American bombers could take off, refuel, and return after striking the Japanese homeland. For 3 days, U.S. battleships pounded the island with relentless bombardment, but the Japanese did not fire a shot. They weren't waiting on the beaches. They were hidden deep underground, in a vast network of tunnels, bunkers, and interlocking firing positions like a labyrinth. And the moment the U.S. Marines set foot on the black volcanic sand, hell itself erupted. Every meter gained was paid for in blood. The fighting raged for 5 relentless weeks, 70,000 U.S. Marines against 21,000 Japanese defenders who fought to the last man. Nearly 7,000 Americans were killed and more than 19,000 wounded. The photograph of the flag being raised atop Mount Suribachi became an enduring symbol, but behind it lay unspeakable pain. Iwo Jima was a victory, but the costliest one since the war began. And for Nimitz, it was a grim warning. The closer they came to Japan itself, the heavier the price would be. Then, in April 1945, U.S. forces launched the invasion of Okinawa, the last major island on the road to Japan, just 550 kilometers from Kyushu. At first, they met little resistance, but that calm was only a facade. The Japanese had already carved out a vast defensive network beneath the island, bunkers, tunnels, and interlocking trenches spread throughout its rugged terrain. The Battle of Okinawa dragged on until late June 1945 and became the bloodiest battle of the Pacific War. For the first time, Imperial Japan unleashed massive waves of kamikaze suicide planes against the USS Fleet, inflicting severe damage. On June 21, American forces finally secured Okinawa, but there was no celebration, only grief. The cost was staggering. Over 12,000 American dead, while Japan lost nearly 100,000 lives, including many civilians. The next step, the Japanese home islands, promised to be a true nightmare. And from Okinawa, the Allies began planning their final operation, Operation Downfall, the largest amphibious invasion ever conceived, aimed at Japan itself, and scheduled for the end of 1945. But, by sheer fortune, it never had to happen. Fortunately, that bloody invasion scenario never had to be carried out. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forcing the Japanese government to accept unconditional surrender. On the 2nd of September 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz signed the instrument of Japan's surrender on behalf of the United States. World War II was officially over. After the war, Nimitz became one of the most respected figures in America. In December 1945, he was appointed Chief of Naval Operations and formally assumed the position from Admiral Ernest J. King on the 15th of December 1945. In this role, Nimitz faced a complex challenge, demobilizing millions of servicemen and restructuring the Navy from its massive wartime scale to a sustainable peacetime force. Thanks to his exceptional organizational skills, the transition went smoothly, reducing manpower while maintaining a modern, capable fleet ready to meet the new demands of post-war America. During his tenure as Chief of Naval Operations, 1945, 1947, Nimitz made a lasting mark by strongly advocating for the modernization of the U.S. Navy. He became a key supporter of Captain Hyman G. Rickover's bold proposal to build a submarine powered by nuclear energy. Thanks to Nimitz's backing, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine, USS Nautilus, was laid down in 1952, ushering in the era of America's nuclear submarine fleet. This is regarded as one of Nimitz's greatest legacies as Chief of Naval Operations. Nimitz was also known for his integrity and deep sense of responsibility. At the Nuremberg war crimes trials in 1946, he voluntarily testified on behalf of German Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor and commander of Nazi Germany in its final days, confirming that the U.S. Navy had also conducted unrestricted submarine warfare, similar to that of the Germans. Nimitz's honest testimony is believed to have been a decisive factor in Donitz receiving a 10-year prison sentence instead of the death penalty handed to many other Nazi commanders. In December 1947, Nimitz stepped down as Chief of Naval Operations and assumed the honorary position of Special Advisor to the Secretary of the Navy in San Francisco. Although his 5-star rank technically meant he would never retire entitled to full pay for life, Nimitz withdrew from active military life and avoided political involvement. He devoted his time to symbolic and charitable activities. Nimitz played an active role in rebuilding post-war relations with Japan, most notably by helping raise funds to restore the legendary battleship Mikasa, flagship of Admiral Togo, during the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. From 1948 to 1956, he also served as a member of the Board of Regents of the University of California, reflecting his lifelong commitment to education and the development of younger generations. Chester W. Nimitz passed away on the 20th of February, 1966, on Yerba Buena Island, California, following a stroke at the age of 80. His funeral was held with full honors on his 81st birthday, the 24th of February, 1966, after which he was laid to rest at the Golden Gate National Cemetery. In accordance with his wishes, Nimitz was buried beside his closest comrades in arms, Admirals Raymond A. Spruance, Richmond K. Turner, and Charles A. Lockwood, the men who had stood by him throughout the war. Historians regard Chester W. Nimitz as the architect of the U.S. Navy's victory in the Pacific. His success stemmed from a combination of extraordinary strategic brilliance and the overwhelming industrial might of the United States. Nimitz was renowned for his leadership style, humble, calm, yet decisively firm. Thanks to these factors, Nimitz significantly shortened the path to victory while minimizing American casualties to the greatest extent possible. Throughout his career, Chester W. Nimitz was deeply respected by his comrades for his sense of duty and unwavering dedication. He never sought personal glory or wealth, always emphasizing the collective effort over individual achievement. After the war, Nimitz declined all offers to write memoirs or to take lucrative commercial positions, believing it was wrong to profit personally from the sacrifices of others. To the American public, Nimitz came to embody the ideal of the citizen soldier generation men, who were not only skilled and courageous on the battlefield, but also humble, principled, and honorable in everyday life. To honor this quiet national hero, the United States Navy named its first nuclear-powered supercarrier after him, the USS Nimitz, CVN-68. This legendary vessel, along with the entire Nimitz class of aircraft carriers, has roamed the world's oceans for decades, standing as a lasting symbol of the naval power and enduring legacy that Chester W. Nimitz helped to build.